Hello students, we will now continue our study of postmodernism with our presentation Style and Movements part 6, and let us now look at postmodern classicism. We talked about freestyle classicism last time, where classical architecture is used very freely, and a column, for example a classical order column, can be very much distorted and given a form that looks very humorous and playful to us. But there is a postmodern classicism which is a response to urban and historical buildings. It is ornament and public symbolism being paramount in it. It has a formal vocabulary, it has a symbolic form, it has got applied ornamentation, it has got historical recall. We look at the building, we are able to recall history through that building. And in some way or another, we have looked at some of these points in the last presentation when we talked about several buildings starting from the pioneering Vana Venturi house to Piazza d'Italia, and we covered these aspects in those buildings, including the Team Disney building, the use of bright colors because of the context that it is meant as an amusement park for children. Now, when we talk of postmodernism, who are the architects who practice postmodernism or who practiced postmodernism? We have Michael Graves, who for some time in his career was making buildings under late modernism, then moved over to postmodernism. Robert Venturi, who is the pioneering architect of postmodernism with his wonderful book Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. We have Mario Botta, we have James Stirling, Aldo Rossi, and Oswald Matthias Ungers. We also have those who have adopted on appropriate occasions the language of postmodernism, for example by large firms as those of Cesar Pelli, Philip Johnson, Con Pedersen Fox, and Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. This airport is designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, is an example of how the airport design itself, the shape of the roof is postmodernistic. Or this skyscraper, though it might look very sleek glass skyscraper, but is actually an example of a postmodern skyscraper in its form. And it has also been used in corporate practices in Japan, England and virtually every country in the world. Now, when we talk of postmodern classicism, it has made new use of archetypes of classicism in a way that could be more widely understood. It is to make classicism more comprehensible by giving it a contemporary feel, a reaction to the failure of modern urbanism or modern city design. They also say that classicism already has major patents on city building. All the new ideas that are being tried in city building, classicism already has all those concepts patented, like the piazza, the monument, the armature of the connective tissue like the streets and the axis, it's all there. So let's come to the Staatsgalerie in Stuttgart by James Stirling. It illustrates to us the main points of postmodern classicism. It has a range of styles and appeals to different taste cultures. In fact, it will speak 4 different architectural languages for 4 different functions. Language number 1, the language of the modernist volume. This block of the Staatsgalerie, it's a modernist volume, and if you look at this house designed in the Wiesenhof Siedlung project by Le Corbusier and his cousin Jean-Pierre Jeanneret, you find a very strong resemblance between the two. This music room of the Staatsgalerie and the administration section recalls this house to us, which is actually a modernist volume. That is the first language, it's a modernist language. Then we also see there are several units that are painted in bright colors, like in Pompidou mechanical equipment of Centre Pompidou here. So we find that bright colors in some features of the new Staatsgalerie. You find that here, you find that in these elements. Thus, we have number 2 language is the language of the high-tech forms. This entire structure that you see here, or the railings that you see here, the handrails that you see here, the front entrance is a high-tech canopy, and so are the handrails which indicate the passage through the site. This is the language of high-tech forms. Third and fourth is the language of the masonry work. One is it has got a plastered vernacular style which relates to the adjacent domestic housing. So this plastered part of the Staatsgallery gallery relates to this housing, domestic housing, which is next to the Staatsgallery gallery. Rusticated masonry picks up the tones and classicism of the older museum. So there is an older museum and there is the newer museum. James Stirling sees to it that the masonry is able to connect the new building with the old one, also correlating the height of the new museum with the old museum and also with the adjacent housing. So what is he doing? When he goes towards the music room, the administration section, towards that side he correlates that with the modernist block of the Wiesenhof Siedlung project, which is also there in Stuttgart in Germany. When he comes in front, he makes the canopy, the handrails, etc., borrowing from high-tech forms. When he talks of the masonry, the plastered work, it is similar to the housing next to the museum. The height of the museum is similar to the height of the old museum. The masonry work of the new museum is similar to that of the older museum. So he is trying to relate the museum to different contexts. And then there is the rotunda within the museum. This is the rotunda from the aerial view. And within the museum, there are this bright green color that has been used inside. Of course, there will be certain criticisms also that you will read about these aspects, but you find this bright color within the museum. The picture of the interiors. So 4 languages for 4 different functions, but the result is not chaotic. It is eclectic, it is a collection of styles, but Robert Venturi says that it is a difficult whole, and he recommends that here James Stirling is dealing with a complex and contradictory reality, similar to his own book title Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. And we can say that this collection of styles in the New Staatsgallery is not the eclecticism of Industrial Revolution. It is more the radical approach of architects in the neoclassical phase of architecture, 18th century. You remember neoclassical architecture had 4 phases. There was the initial phase, then there was the archaeological neoclassicism, there was radical neoclassicism, and finally there was visionary neoclassicism. So the radical neoclassical phase had a building called École du Chirurgie by Jacques Gondoin, in which we talked about in the earlier lecture how in this one building Gondoin had put together the Roman triumphal arch as the entry, then there is a Corinthian colonnade, central courtyard, there is a lecture theatre at the end which has got a Pantheon dome and got a half oculus on top. The seating arrangement is like an amphitheatre. So Jacques Gondoin is being eclectic, he is collecting different kind of built forms from classical architecture, but he is putting it together very thoughtfully into his building. And the same thing is done in the New Staatsgallery. In my previous lecture I had mentioned it earlier that this kind of eclecticism being followed by postmodernists is a more thoughtful eclecticism. It is not random or more haphazard as we find in the Industrial Revolution. Let us come to Haas, a building in Vienna by Hans Hollein in 1990. Another typical example of a postmodern building fitting into an existing rich cultural fabric. The postmodernists had not hesitated in introducing dramatic contrast vis-a-vis the surrounding urban scape. We would normally think that postmodernists would try to make their buildings completely complementary to their urban context, and we see that in the New Staatsgallery. But on the other hand, postmodernists have also gone in for a complete contrast, as we find in the Centre Pompidou, a classic example of high-tech late modernism. Just like Pompidou has done a complete contrast to the surrounding architecture of Paris, the Haas house is a complete contrast to the surrounding architecture in Vienna. This building has a hotel, restaurant, cafe, sales room for an international fashion chain. It is situated in the heart of Vienna with regard to St. Stephen's Cathedral and among other historical buildings. Now, to see the building in context, it was initially very strongly criticized for erecting this building against St. Stephen's Cathedral, one of the finest monuments of late German Gothic art in Europe. But it is a radical approach. It slowly emerged as an architectural masterpiece. The greatness was in its ability to fit into a contrasting urban scape and the important lessons on building in context through a radical way. And thus the contradiction was whether it is coexisting or is it clashing with the surrounding urban scape, and the answer is it coexisted. Even when having the St. Stephen's Cathedral, it did not clash with it, but the way it was designed, where the glass was put in the building, reflected the St. Stephen's Cathedral on its facade. And thus we find in Haas House we have the new, that is here in this block, and we have the old, the St. Stephen's Cathedral being reflected in the glass. Thus it becomes an interesting contrast between the old and the new being reflected in the glass of Haas House. It is a reflection of the old in the new. It has got an interior atrium with luxury stores, 3 stories of offices, etc. And these are some pictures of the interior. When it comes to ornamentation, the building has a blue-green tinged glass facade, and then the glass continues till certain point, and then there is a stone veneer cladding. There is also marble cladding, and again, as I said, you can see the image of St. Stephen's Cathedral, a tribute to that old monument. Now, this is the stone cladding here, and then there is the glass cladding. There is elevational transition is taking place from stone clad to glass clad. The glass side presents itself as if deliberately towards the St. Stephen's Cathedral. An icon of modernity is paying homage to the old building by reflecting its image in its facade, and this for you is symbolism. Coming to the Humana building in Kentucky, one of the principal buildings in postmodernism made by Michael Graves in 1986. It is like many postmodern skyscrapers having the classic tripartite division in the building of base, shaft and capital. The base here is an 8-story loggia extending in the front of the office building. Then we have the shaft of common office floors, and then the capital that you see here, if you see it from the side, it is like a kind of a ziggurat. Postmodernists attempt to relate the building, like I said in the previous examples, to the surrounding urban scape. This is the third example in this kind of connection. After the Staatsgalerie, Haas House, now we look at this tendency of the postmodernists to relate their buildings to the surrounding urban scape. The building loggia, for example, matches the cornice forms. This cornice forms that you see here, it matches the cornice forms and the cornice heights of the neighboring historic structures. Like the cornice here matches the cornice of the Humana building right next to it, and it also matches the sight line. The sight line of the building is matching the neighboring historical structures, and it blends into the skyline rather than dominate it. It uses pink granite cladding, bronze tinted glazing, warm tones to complement the brick and stone of the adjacent 19th century structures. Thus, like I told you, it is matching the building sight lines. The height of the arcade is matched with the neighboring houses. So here where the passage of the front building ends, at that height it matches the nearby buildings, and where the loggia of structure completely ends, it again matches this height of the building at a distance. The line of the street continues in the 3 upper floors that you see. These are the 3 upper floors, and similar form, top of the arcade here, like I said, is similar to that of the neighboring buildings. So by matching the cornice style, by matching the height of the arcade and the complete building, with the surrounding buildings by maintaining the sight line of the building, by maintaining the skyline of the skyscraper. He is matching it with the surrounding urban scape. There are other points also that you can read about the aspects that Michael Graves kept in mind. This 8-story open-sided arcade or covered passage combines the area of public and private use, and its front forms a part of the city. Because of this loggia, the building actually starts to become a part of the city. It also uses expensive cladding materials to emphasize the windows recesses, which is unlike what late modernists would do. They would conceal the glass behind continuous, they would rather conceal that behind continuous grids and glazed surfaces. So, that kind of recessing would not be seen or emphasized in late modernism. Here I show you the coexistence of styles in our buildings, though we are classifying various styles and movements and we are subdividing them. I told you previously in a lecture the reason why we need to do that as architects and scholars, so that we are able to have a more deeper discourse about buildings, so that we can bring that into our design studio. We can express our design intent through the way we describe our buildings in various movements, but the buildings coexist. In this picture, for example, we have a skyscraper that is late modern versus the Humana building that is post modern, and they are coexisting together, and that is true for all cities. So again, if we compare the Humana building with the Chifley Tower done by Con Pedersen Fox in Australia, who I told you in the beginning also resort to postmodern buildings. Here the similar concept of tripartite division has been used. There is a base, there is a shaft, and there is a capital. Then coming to the AT&T building in New York by Philip Johnson, John Burgee architects in 1982. It is a very sleek classical box which is 195 meter tall building having a publicly accessible ground floor, and again a tripartite division of base, shaft and capital. But the amazing thing is this climax, which is a rounded notch in a pointed roof. It is a revival of Sullivan's idea of the articulated skyscraper with the base, shaft and capital, as we saw in the Humana building, we saw in the Chifley Tower. But the important point is that the gable contours is this notch has been given actually to promote the corporate identity, that it can be unmistakably seen in the skyline. This feature has been borrowed from furniture of the time, somewhere earlier in the 18th and 19th centuries, a more traditional furniture, and this notch has been borrowed from there. But here the identity is that in tall buildings you are not able to see the building in totality, and generally when you see glass cuboids in the city, the building identity is lost in those cuboids. But this building, when you look at it from a distance, you look towards the skyline and you see the notch, you will immediately know this is the AT&T building, and it is clearly identifiable. Therefore, this decision for having this capital is a commercial factor of corporate identity, attempt to make the building stand out in the surrounding skyscrapers, because all skyscrapers are similar in function, structural system, building system, similar bylaws, but here only the external envelope is the only defining feature of these skyscrapers. This skyscraper turns out to be postmodern, but is equally modern in technology from within, but the highlight or the unique selling point is the notch. Again the same thing happens in the Westin Hotel in New York, and here it is a 45 story tower of the hotel over a 10-story base, attempt to create something different in the drab New York skyline to draw attention to the building with the profuse colors used in the buildings. The building is sliced on the exterior like this to create the appearance of two buildings coming together, but it has in a sense got a very simple square plan with the rooms all centered around a core of elevators. Thus we have this picture showing you the corporate identity. Each of these buildings, whether the Westin Hotel, the AT&T building or the Co-America Tower in Detroit, can be easily identified which building this is because they carry that identity within them. Again, looking at postmodernism with regard to the use of sharp contrasting colors, we have seen that in the Westin Hotel, we saw that in the last session in the Team Disney building, we also see it in the SATA Center in the MIT campus by Frank Gehry. In the Co-America building, we find the stylistic link to the historical past. There is a historical recall because the top of the building, the pinnacle of the building is inspired from Gothic spires. Another important building in the pantheon of postmodern, important iconic postmodern buildings is the Public Services Building in Oregon by Michael Graves in 1982. It was commonly known as the Portland Building, crowned by two flat step stories that you see here, 15-story municipal office building. It has got a distinctive block-like design, it's got these square window cutouts, you find the same thing in the Humana building also by Michael Graves, and this actually became an icon of postmodern architecture, these square cutout windows in a masonry like facade, not the sleek glass curtain walling of late modernism. There are two protruding triangle forms that you see here which are largely ornamental, and there is the tripartite division in base, shaft and capital in this building, which is the historical recall from classical architecture again. Here we have it, the base, shaft and capital. Then there is an assembly of small individual bodies at the summit that was originally planned. Ribbon strips on the sides were planned which are not there, but the statue of Portlandia adorns the entrance today. The statue of Portlandia is here, and this cost of this building was 14 times cheaper than the HSBC, which we will look at in more detail when we talk of high tech. This is about $40 a square feet at the time, and it has got this multiple colors to add vibrancy and character to the building. Now, another aspect of postmodernism is critical regionalism. Very interesting because we will be seeing critical regionalism as its own set, separate from postmodernism. But this revival of the past is a strong aspect of postmodernism, and thus the El Ruwais Mosque in Saudi Arabia is a significant example of critical regionalism but within the postmodern architecture. But we will be looking at critical regionalism separately because it is a much more well defined movement and it is more closely linked with traditions, local materials, local climate and other aspects which we will see separately. Then there is this cathedral by Mario Botta, a strong postmodernist architect. There is got postmodern classicism in this building because of historical forms clubbed together with a modern design. The cylindrical shape is a classical idea of symmetry and geometric purity. It uses bricks, arches and columns, and it is a post-modern religious building. So, if you compare a post-modern religious building with a late modern religious building, we compare it with the Garden Grove Community Church I talked about earlier, and we see the stark contrast between the two, as we see within the interiors also, the brick clad massive interiors of the cathedral at Ivry versus the monumental glass and steel interior of the Garden Grove Community Church, which is based on the core idea or concept of Bauhaus. So, this is the difference between the interiors of the two. The sectional views, the interiors of the cathedral, and see how the light filters in from the top. Then there is a very interesting project called the Notch Project by Site Architects in California. It has got a corner that is about 14 feet high. It is a notch which serves as the main entryway. So, in the morning this notch comes out of the building and the commercial center, the mall opens up, and then later on it is again pushed back in, it is again moved in the wedge, and it is a 45-ton wedge which is mechanized so that they can open it and they can close it. And Charles Zeng says this is a spectacle, is theatricality in retail architecture, something that is very much connected with postmodernism about playfulness and about trying to do something very dramatic. This is an architecture which brings a kind of a daily performance for the consumers in this project. And then again the Atlantis apartment block in Miami, in this there is this massive block which reminds us of the Unite habitation apartment block by Le Corbusier. Here there is a use of primary colors, there are bold geometric forms, there is a postmodern visual language in the building. It is a reinterpretation of Unite habitation, and you can clearly see how bright primary colors have been used throughout the building. Thus, various strands of postmodernism are radical eclecticism, postmodern classicism, a revival of the past as we saw in that mosque in Saudi Arabia, postmodern regionalism again connected with that mosque, and the urban context, the way the building is related to the urban context, like for example in the Haas house or even in the Starts gallery. Then the modernist regionalism, which we will actually be studying under critical regionalism, is like for example the Vidhan Bhavan in Bhopal by Charles Correa. It has got a regional context, like, and we will study that in more detail. The Vidhan Bhavan borrows its dome above the assembly from the Sanchi Stupa. Or the permanent mission of India to the United Nations in New York by Charles Correa. It is a very complex program where there is the office of the permanent mission of India, there is an exhibition gallery, there are 4 levels of podium surmounted by a tower with residential accommodation of 5 different categories of staff, from a very small flat for a security personnel to a 200 square meter triplex apartment for the Deputy Consul General at the top. So just as Charles Moore brought in a bit of Italy into the USA through the Piazza d'Italia project, Charles Correa brought a bit of India into the USA through the permanent mission building. And here Susanna Seifman says Charles Correa has long been preoccupied with cultural iconography, red granite base topped by a Kenyan red aluminium curtain wall. It is suggestive of red sandstone architecture of northern India. At the top is a double height penthouse porch that echoes the Indian Barsati, which is used for open air sleeping. It is not noticeable from the ground level. It is readily apparent is the grand monolithic bronze entryway, an architect interested not only in the significance of the ancient but also in the power of authority that is represented by the permanent mission of India to the United Nations in New York. Thus we find the use of red sandstone in the LIC building by Charles Correa in Delhi versus the red granite he has used in the permanent mission. So postmodern vocabulary, modern building with historical recall. We saw that in the AT&T building, in the Shifley Towers, Base Shaft and Capitol, Humana building, Base Shaft and Capitol, and other points where it connects with the urban context in the Starts Gallery, Stuttgart, and the Piazza d'Italia with its Italian references. Then the urban context, and we saw that in these buildings, particularly in Humana and the Starts Gallery, how the building has been related to the urban context. In postmodern vocabulary, there are regional and cultural reflections. So in the Petronas Star, which we have not seen, there is the use of the Islamic motif in the plan of the towers, and Vidhan Bhavan in Bhopal by Charles Correa, there is the use of the Sanchi Stupa, and there are other buildings in India which we will study under critical regionalism where these cultural and regional reflections will be seen. In postmodern vocabulary, there is dramatic effect. Now I have put here Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao also, but we will study that separately under deconstructivism. But definitely we have the dramatic effect in the Team Disney building, in the One Union Square South building in New York, and the K2 building in Tokyo with its freestyle classical column. Then there is use of traditional and modern materials, whether we see that in the Haas, we see that in the British Consulate in Delhi, We see that in the Starts Gallery, in the Cathedral in Avery by Mario Botta, or Humana Building by Michael Graves. We find this postmodern vocabulary, which has become an icon of postmodernism, the square fenestrations punctured in neat rows on the facade. Even Charles Correa did that in the Permanent Mission Building, Team Disney Building, Westin Hotel, the Portland Building, and the Humana Building. All of them have this iconic image of the square fenestration punctured in neat rows on the facade. So we end here with postmodernism and continue in the next presentation. We will look at critical regionalism and deconstructivism in one presentation followed by another. Thank you.